Bienvenidos and welcome everyone. Before we begin, I want to remind all attendees to please sign into the link provided in the chat by Jessica. If you have any issues, please direct message her. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, please direct them to Nane and we will address them at the conclusion of the presentation. Also, a short survey will be shared in the chat by Jessica toward the end of the event, so please take a couple of minutes to complete this survey for us. We have ASL interpretation services by Carlos and closed captioning provided by Annabelle. You can enable closed captioning by selecting live transcripts and enabling captions. Thank you for being here. Lastly, this is a reminder that this event will be recorded, so please adjust your settings to your preference. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to offer a land acknowledgement on behalf of the Planning Committee. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We are currently occupying ancestral land of the Tongva people. In our work to promote social justice and education, we must always consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today. With that being said, I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's presentation for Latinx Heritage Month. This is Glendale Community College's second year observing Latinx Heritage Month, and our theme for this year is celebrating our diverse stories, voices, and identities. The Planning Committee selected this theme to celebrate the unique individuals within the Latinx community, despite the various challenges they have faced in this country. Lastly, it is an honor to introduce today's speaker, Prisca Dorcas, who will be discussing the topic Latinx families, generational trauma, and storytelling as resistance. A little bit about Prisca. Prisca Dorcas Mojica Rodriguez was born in Managua, Nicaragua, but she calls Nashville, Tennessee home. She got her Master's of Divinity from Vanderbilt University in the spring of 2015. The bulk of her work is around making accessible, through storytelling and curating content, the theories and heavy material that is oftentimes only taught in the racist and classist institutions known as academia. She started the platform Latina Rebels in 2013, and currently it boasts over 200,000 organic followers online. Currently, Prisca has recently released her first full-length book with Seal Press, which is a subsidiary of Hatchet Book Group. Her book, which just recently came out, is entitled For Brown Girls with Sharp Edges and Tender Hearts, a love letter to women of color. With that being said, it is my pleasure to welcome Prisca Dorcas.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to cover the screen because I don't want to look at myself if I get blown up. I think that's very nerve-wracking. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I'm working on a different time zone than y'all. So it's later for me, and the señora in me is like, oh, ¿qué es esto? But today's topic is really heavy. I do want to warn, do all the trigger warnings, all the, if you need to get up and stretch, if you need to like take care of yourself, if you need to get out of the space. I think that those are all totally valid responses to the topics that we'll be discussing. Before we start, I guess I want to get us all on the same starting line. So methodologically, so the ways that I do these talks is that I tell stories. I used to be an undergrad in the honors college, and we had to like go to, I don't know, like 5 talks every semester to like meet our requirement for the honors college every semester. And I watched so many lectures that were so boring that I just refuse to be part of that spin cycle sometimes of speakers who like yeah, it could be really boring. And so I'm going to tell you like stories because I think it's a way better way to like transmit information. It's a really good ancestral way of like not only transmitting information, but preserving family histories. It's a really good way to teach lessons. And it's a really good way to explain a lot of these concepts in more conversational ways that I think everybody can understand better. So I'm gonna speak Spanglish. I am comfortable in Spanglish. It's not to say that because you're Latinx, you have to understand Spanish. That is not my intention. I speak Spanglish fluently. It is the language, I think, of a lot of immigrant people. We're just comfortable in two languages. Sometimes you can't find the right word for something in English and you just like lean on Spanish, and it works the other way around for me. So it'll come out when it comes out if it wants to come out. I do speak colloquially. It's really important for me to do these kinds of talks that feel like we're just chatting because, again, it's just easier and more fun. And in my ideal world, in my like best case scenario, mi mami is tuned in like y'all, she's listening with a translator because she doesn't speak English, but she can understand everything that I say. And she didn't go to college. So it's very important for me to not fill my talks with a lot of jargon and verbosity and like, the big, $10 words. I intentionally want to break it down to just like hang out with your amigas on some really good chisme time. And finally, I'm going to cuss. I think that respectability politics is one of the harshest realities of people of color and the things that we have to adhere to. This conditional way of being perceived, especially women of color, to be considered worthy, smart, a slew of other terms. We have to kind of tweak the way we show up in spaces, and I just refuse like visible tattoos. I will cuss, I will have blue nail polish, I will have a piercing. Like I'm going to show up in this space in the ways that I think are more uncomfortable, and to make people analyze any resistance that they may harbor towards me. Why is that the case? So moving on. I guess the first topic that I want to talk about as generational trauma is colorism. Let me start with some basic colorism stuff. I brought a bunch of books if you're a person that loves books. While I do stories, a lot of what I understand is on a lot of peer-reviewed academic literature. So if you want to dive in more, I encourage you. This is called Color Stories by Jeffrey M. Wilder. It's probably one of my favorite books on the topic of colorism because as she presents it really conversationally. It's not a hard book to read. It's not a thick book to read. So the history of colorism, the first time we hear the term, as far as I know, it was 1903. It was called colortocracy. And W.E. Du Bois came up with that term. But colorism, as we sort of understand it today, was coined by Alice Walker in 1983. So it's gone through its evolutions. And today, the way we understand colorism is the unequal treatment and discrimination of people belonging to the same racial or ethnic minority group based on physical differences. So everybody understands colorism as like a skin tone thing, but it's a lot more than that. So yes, there is a scale where the lightest is considered better by society and the darkest is considered bad. How do we see that? I'm trying to think of like really great example. So media, if you turn into any channel, the likelihood that you'll see a dark skinned Black person on TV is pretty high. Or the likelihood of a non-Black Latinx to look like me instead of like a Sofia Vergara, who is a natural blonde, is again very high. We have a preference of what we want people in certain racial and ethnic groups to look, and we have perpetuated it in media. We have perpetuated it in like every facet of society. I mean, corporate America It's everywhere. So that's a great book to start if you're interested in that topic. And one of my favorite books for this topic is Blacks and Blackness in Central America, as a Central American myself. It breaks down a lot of like the things that have resulted in colorism in our countries. And so this, like, did y'all know back in the day that our countries had 7 different racial categories? It wasn't just black and white. It has never been that. We had blanco, so white. We had indio, indigenous. Mestizo, so someone who's white and indigenous. Mulatto, somebody who's black and white, mixed. Negro, so black. And sambo, people who are mixed black and indigenous. Does that make sense? Wait, did I say that mulatto is black and white? That's what I meant if I didn't say it. So we used to have all these categories, and it somehow got dwindled down to everybody being like, I'm from Latin America, I'm mestizo, or I'm from Latin America, I'm mulatto. And we've like completely erased all of these racial categories. I was for a really long time told that I was mestiza. And then I discovered I have Black ancestors too. So that is actually an inaccurate representation of my family's mixing. But we don't have a term for that anymore because they've gotten rid of all the other terms in our countries. And so how is colorism generational trauma, you might ask? Oh, let me enumerate the ways. This is going to get real dense, but I'll break it into stories real quick. We'll swing into it as quickly as we'll swing out of it. But basically, in colonialism in 1400s, 1500s, when we were colonized, a lot of that was happening in other parts of the world. And like the transatlantic slave trade, all of that became the way that our colonizers, which were all European, Dutch, Spanish, they're all from these white countries. They came to our countries and basically said, we don't think you're good enough. The only way you could be good enough is if you mix racially with us. This is the blancamiento that we'll hear about. And if you read any of these books, it mentions it a lot. It is we got to get away from those savage origins. And so in our countries, our colorism is, especially if in non-Black Latinx communities, our colorism is not only is it anti-Black because being dark is the inferior aspect of this colorism scale, but it's also anti-Indigenous. So someone like me, I'll never look Black or get accused of being Black, but I have been and I have experienced anti-indigeneity through the ways that we have internalized brownness as deviant, because we have been told through years and years of land grabs and dehumanization that being Indigenous is bad also. So how did I experience it? We're going to go into storytelling. I told y'all we're not going to sit in the facts and all the stuff that y'all can read, and it's great to know about. But so I grew up, my mom is really light skinned. My dad is really Indigenous presenting. And I grew up being told that our family, my dad is with my mom because she is the improvement. However, I look just like my dad. And so I internalized a lot of that messaging. And the first time I really, really tried to change my appearance, I was 15 years old. I was in high school, and this girl, her name was Yesenia Otero. That's another thing about generational trauma like this, is that white people don't even have to be in the room. The colonizers, as we know them today, don't have to be in the room for us to reinforce it, because it's so casual and everyday in our culture that we will regulate it with each other. So I was raised in Miami. Miami at the time was 70-something% Latinx, the population. I mean, we're everywhere. And I was in a lot of non-Black Latinx spaces for most of my schooling. And so it's not like there was white people being like, you're not beautiful because you're not white. Had nothing to do with that. It was our communities doing the most in exalting whiteness at every turn that they could. And so this girl named Yesenia Otero used to bring this bag, clear plastic bag of bootleg colored contacts. And I was like, I need it. I need it all. The beauty industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry around colorism. Because not only, like I said, is it skin tone, it's hair texture. It has to do with nose, like the width of your nose, how narrow your nose is, how thin it might be, has to do with your lips, and attributes that would be rejected in bodies that are darker are always going to be praised in bodies that are lighter. That is the way that colorism works. So the way that the Kardashians can have their cornrows, but if you're a Black person and you show up with that at work, you might get sent home. That's the way that colorism works. Like, and that's what I think a lot of the uproar when white people do appropriate things that people of color are punished from or by. So I remember I'm like, Jasenia, how much are these contacts? Because I was ready. I'm invested in not looking like I do at this point in my life. And she's like, oh, it's $20. And I was like, oh, crap. So I didn't get an allowance growing up. My mom didn't believe in that. My parents didn't believe in that. They're like, your allowance is that we feed you. What is the problem? So I did have reduced lunch. So my lunch was 40 cents at that time. So I just started saving all of my money I got every day, all of my 40 cents, until I finally had $20. I just like starved for this whiteness, this aspirational whiteness that I was taught to overvalue because it's so ingrained, it's so casual, it's in media, it's in our parents' conversations with us, that we do internalize it and begin to believe it. And so I remember I walked up to her and gave her, like, I had all my pennies and all my dimes and quarters. And I was like, $20. Let me see your stash. And she was like, here. And she laid them all out, all the colors. And it was like every color you could imagine. And I remember thinking, like, what's going to look most natural? I picked a turquoise color, y'all. And it was awful. It was horrendous. And not only because they're bootlegged, they're not there and they weren't fitted to my eye, so it was bigger than my eye. It was awful, and immediately started bubbling, like things started forming in it. I mean, my eyes would be bloodshot red, and I would be like, I will live through the pain, I will go blind to not look like me. That is how ingrained colorism is in our communities. We will go out of our way to do anything to not look like our Black and brown ancestors. And there's a lot of reasons for that. By the time I hit 15, I had already also experienced in school, like just dating, having little boyfriends in middle school whose friends would be like, why are you dating her? She looks like an India. That's a lovely term we love to throw around in our communities. It is used as a slur. It is used as an insult. So I say all this because colorism is so normalized in our communities, and it's 100% generational trauma. So I'm going to read you all a piece that further kind of explores that. It's called The Politics of Pigmentation. And I hope you all sit with some of the stuff that I talk about. Mi mami tells me to get out of the sun. Mi mami tells me to put on sunblock. Mi mami tells me to not go to the beach so much. And she's not protecting me from skin cancer, y'all. She's not telling me to stay out of the sun for some deep concern for my health. Mi mami doesn't want me to be too brown. You see, mi mami's from the mountains of Jinotega in my home country of Nicaragua. The mountains where it stays like a cool 60 degrees all year round. In the mornings, it's like a thick fog you wake up to. It's like idyllic. And a lot of her townspeople wear sweaters regularly. Mi mami, like many of her townspeople, is really light skinned. She doesn't tan in the sun. She burns. She turns bright red. But in her family, so she's the second oldest. There's a brother, then her. Then she has a sister, another sister, and a brother. And her brother's a little darker skin. It has black hair. My mom's lighter skin, but she has dark black hair too and dark eyes. And then the siblings, all the three siblings underneath her have like ash blonde hair, light brown eyes. And so I would hear growing up as a joke that my grandma would say, and everybody would laugh at, that la raza mejoró with every child my grandma had because they got lighter. Mi mami tells me to get out the sun. Mi mami tells me to put on sunblock. Mi mami's dad, mi abuelito, has green eyes, light brown hair, and he's light skinned. His mom, though, was black. And that was something I didn't hear about till I was almost 30 years old. I heard this and I was shocked that nobody had ever talked about it because we're a family that passes down stories. We're a family that keeps people alive, but somehow we forgot this super important great grandmother. Everybody spends a lot of time talking about like who's going to get abuelito's green eyes because it seems to have skipped a whole generation of grandkids and kids at this point. So everybody just keeps hoping. When is it going to happen? Is it now? They don't give up the hope. But we managed to keep my great grandmother dead in our memories. And I understand what's happening. I understand what our society has taught us about brownness. I understand what my mom's trying to teach me about brownness. I, however, look like my dad. I'm like a copy paste. Like God did like select all copy paste, you know? My dad's side of the family is darker. They have black brown hair. It's straight. They have brown skin. They have prominent indigenous features, what we think of prominent indigenous features, like flat faces, high cheekbones. And mi papi isn't afraid of the sun and isn't ashamed of being darker. His favorite pastime, he sits in the sun while someone's driving or he's driving. If the sun's like on the side where it's burning, you know, in the car, he just like has to say, "Qué rico se siente cuando me quemo así." Meanwhile, this could happen in a car. This could happen in a park. This could happen anywhere. My dad is loving the feeling of being burnt, which it's another conversation in and of itself. But my mommy will be sitting right next to him with long sleeves, a hat if she can help it. And she complains about her hands getting darker all the time. She's like, "I'm getting manchas," because it's the one thing she can't cover up and keep away from the sun. And I understand in my context, admiration for men has everything to do with how much money they can provide for their family, how they can take care of their family. Meanwhile, women in my context are seen as you have to be both pretty and like giving and nurturing, you know, and a maternal figure, but pretty. And pretty, unfortunately, has meant lighter. My mommy tells me to get out of the sun. My mommy tells me to put on sunblock. My mommy tells me to not go to the beach so much because I have mi papi's brownness and mi mommy's gender. A curse. I was born female and brown in a cultura that hates women often and especially hates the darker ones. But avoiding the sun feels unnatural and distasteful. And especially if you understand full well what's happening, when they're telling you to get out of the sun, when they're saying, "Te estás poniendo negra," with rechazo in their tone. Mi mommy tells me to get out of the sun. My mommy tells me to put on sunblock. But I cannot undo the fact that my skin absorbs sun rays like magic. My skin turns all the vitamin D that it receives immediately into melanin. I can be in the sun for 5 minutes and I'm a new shade. It's supernatural, y'all. I have to change my makeup in the winter and in the summer because I change shades significantly. In the winter, I get like a yellowy undertone, like the inside of a walnut. And in the summer, I can get real brown.